Winter did not behave like weather. It moved with intention. It came low across the prairie, like a blade dragged flat against the land, screaming through dead grass and frozen soil, tearing at the earth as if searching for something unfinished. Snow followed behind it in long white sheets, erasing fence lines, wagon ruts, and the faint idea that people once believed this place could be tamed. Winter didn't arrive here. It took. It stripped the world down to bone. At the far edge of that emptiness stood a barn no one claimed anymore. Its boards leaned inward like tired shoulders. One wall had collapsed, exposing its ribs to the open sky. The roof sagged under old ice, every gust threatening to finish what time had started. No animals sheltered there now, no tools, no reason. Inside the barn, something still breathed. Her name was Mara Kellan, and she was starving. Not the gentle hunger that sharpens appetite, not the poetic kind people speak about after they've survived. This was hunger that dismantled thought, hunger that burned, hunger that punished memory itself. Mara lay curled in the hay, knees drawn to her chest, her body instinctively trying to reduce its surface to the cold. Her coat was torn nearly in half and stiff with frost. Her skirt hung loose around legs that had grown thin and sharp. Her boots had lost their soles days ago, leather peeled back like skin. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. She had bitten them to stay awake. Her hands would not stop shaking. No matter how tightly she pressed them together, the tremors ran through her wrists and into her arms like faulty wiring. Deep inside her stomach, pain twisted and clawed. Not a dull ache, but a hot, gnawing spiral that stole her breath. Hunger no longer asked. It demanded, and when it was denied, it punished. She could not remember when she had last eaten. 3 days. 4. More. Time had lost meaning the moment survival became her only task. Snow slipped through the broken slats of the barn and struck her skin like thrown needles. She pulled her coat tighter, though it did nothing. The cold had already moved past her skin. It had settled into her bones. It lived there now, patient and permanent. Once, Mara Kellan had been strong. Once, people traveled from distant settlements to find her. Now, even the mice avoided her. She dragged herself across the hay and reached the narrow window. The glass was shattered long ago, replaced by a sheet of ice that had formed naturally in the opening. With effort that made her vision blur, she wiped frost away and looked outside. Across the field stood a farmhouse. Dark, silent, empty. No smoke rose from the chimney. No lantern glowed behind the windows. No sign of life remained. Just weeks earlier, that house had been full. Sacks of flour stacked high, dried meat hanging from hooks, jars of beans and roots and berries lined neatly along shelves. Mara remembered it all because she had helped fill those jars. She had helped bring children into the world inside those walls. She had stitched men back together after accidents with saws and horses and winter itself. She had done it quietly, because out here gratitude was usually expressed in the simple fact that people came back alive. All of it was gone now. Taken. Taken by the same people who once clasped her hands and called her a blessing. Early CTA, within first minute, before this storm tightens any further. If you're into survival tales where the frontier shows its teeth, and people are forced to choose what kind of human they'll be, hit, like, and subscribe. It helps keep stories like this alive, and it tells YouTube to show you more of them. Now, back into the cold. Mara remembered their faces with cruel clarity. Men whose wounds she had cleaned and stitched by firelight. Women who had screamed through labor, then sobbed with relief when Mara placed newborns into their arms. Children she had nursed through fever, using nothing but bitter herbs, patience, and refusal to panic. They had stood outside her door one night, snow soaking their boots, fear twisting familiar faces into something sharp and feral. The preacher, Reverend Caro, had pointed at the pale crescent-shaped mark beneath Mara's collarbone, a birthmark she'd carried since infancy, and called it a sign. When sickness took 3 children that winter, grief needed somewhere to land. Mara had been convenient. Convenient because she knew things other people didn't. Convenient because she lived slightly apart. Convenient because when a community is afraid, it doesn't look for truth. It looks for a target. When her husband, Gideon Kellan, stepped between her and the crowd, they beat him until his face no longer resembled itself. They dragged them both into the square, while snow fell without judgment. No one intervened. No one met her eyes. They offered a choice that was never real. Leave town forever, or burn. That same night, Mara and Gideon fled into the storm, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They did not make it far. Gideon collapsed in this very barn, breath coming thin and uneven, while Mara held his hands and begged him to stay angry. Stay furious if he had to, but not to leave her alone in a world that had already chosen its side. He died quietly anyway. The wind rattled the boards like applause. Mara buried him behind the barn in frozen ground, hacking at the earth with numb hands until they bled. She carved his name into a wooden cross, so crooked it looked ashamed of itself. Inside the barn wall, she scratched a mark for every day she lived without him. 28, 29, 30. Tonight, she did not scratch 31. She sank to her knees and clutched the iron pendant at her throat. Her grandmother's. The only thing she had managed to hide when the mob came. She had once planned to trade it for food. Now, the next town might as well have been another life. The wind howled louder, rattling the barn like laughter. Her stomach answered with its own sharp cry. For the first time since Gideon died, Mara allowed herself to weep. Maybe freezing would be kinder than this waiting. Then, the barn door slammed open. Cold rushed inside like a living thing, carrying snow, darkness, and the heavy shape of a man. Mara scrambled backward, heart hammering so violently it hurt. For a moment, she was certain the mob had returned to finish what they started. But it wasn't them. It was a stranger. He filled the doorway, tall and broad, coat crusted with snow. A burlap sack slung over one shoulder. He did not rush. He did not shout. He stood like the land itself had decided to speak. "Who's there?" he demanded. His voice was deep and rough, the sound of wood splitting. "This is private land." Mara pressed herself against the wall. Her throat barely worked. "Please," she whispered. "I have nowhere else." The man stepped inside and shoved the door shut against the storm. As her eyes adjusted, she saw him clearly. dark beard threaded with frost, hands scarred from years of labor, eyes steady in a way that felt dangerous to someone who'd just been hunted by panic. His gaze swept the barn. Then it stopped on her. "You're from Briar Hollow," he said. The name struck her like a blow. "Not anymore," she rasped. His eyes dropped to her hollow cheeks, her trembling hands, the way she fought to sit upright. Something shifted. He set the sack down carefully, like a man placing a weapon out of reach of his own thoughts. He reached into his coat and pulled free a cloth-wrapped bundle. When he opened it, the smell hit Mara like memory. Bread. Warm. Dense. Real. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She swallowed. "I don't remember." "It matters," he said. "Eat." Her hands shook so badly he had to steady the bread. She forced herself to chew slowly, every bite a battle between pain and relief. Tears slid down her cheeks without permission. "Why?" she asked hoarsely. "I'm not here for payment," he said. "Just eat." When she finished, he shifted his stance to block the draft slipping through the boards. "My mother was burned when I was 9, he said quietly. For growing plants, the town didn't understand. Something inside Mara cracked open. "My cabin's north," he continued. "There's fire. You can come if you can walk." Mara stared at him, as if he'd offered her the moon. "My name's Rourke Maddox," he said, offering his hand. "Can you walk? Or will I carry you?" Outside, the storm raged. She placed her fragile hand in his. The first step felt like betrayal. Her legs had forgotten they were legs. When she stood, pain shot through her feet so bright it turned her vision white. The barn tilted. The world leaned. Rourke caught her, without making it a spectacle. He simply steadied her, weight shifting the way a man shifts a load, quietly, efficiently, without complaint. They moved out into the snow. The wind immediately tried to peel them apart. Snow whipped across Mara's face and filled her lashes. Her lungs seized with each breath like she was inhaling knives. The cold didn't just sting, it judged. Rourke walked as if he knew the storm personally. Head down, shoulders braced, steps measured. He wasn't fighting winter. He was negotiating with it. They crossed the field in silence. The farmhouse loomed nearby, dark and empty. And Mara felt anger rise like heat under her ribs. That house had belonged to people who'd once asked for her help. Now it sat full of stolen warmth, while she stood outside with death in her mouth. Rourke didn't look at the house. He didn't need to. They reached the trees, and the world changed. The wind quieted a fraction, filtered through branches. Snow fell softer, more like ash. Mara stumbled twice. The second time her knees buckled. Rourke stopped. "You're done walking," he said. "I can..." He didn't argue. He turned, crouched, and lifted her like she weighed nothing. Mara pressed her cheek to his coat, smelling pine smoke and sweat and cold wool. Shame rose in her throat. but she was too exhausted to protect pride. Pride was a luxury for the well-fed. The forest swallowed them. The sky faded from gray to bruised purple, then black. Somewhere far off, wolves called. Not close enough to be danger, close enough to be truth. Mara drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind catching on fragments. Gideon's hands, the preacher's voice, the taste of blood, the carved tally marks. When the cabin finally appeared, it looked like it had grown from the earth itself. Low, sturdy logs, a roof buried under snow, smoke threading from the chimney like a quiet promise. Warmth spilled out when Rourke opened the door. It hit Mara like a wave and stole her breath. Not because it was grand, but because it was real. Firelight wrapped around her like something she had forgotten belonged to her. Pine smoke and simmering broth filled the air. The walls were rough-hewn logs, scarred but solid. Everything inside spoke of survival, not comfort. "Sit," Rourke said. She lowered herself slowly, pain flaring as feeling returned. Only now did she understand how close she'd come to simply stopping. Rourke worked without hurry. He poured broth into a wooden bowl, tore bread into smaller pieces, and set it before her like an offering. "Slow," he warned. "Your body remembers hunger." She obeyed. When her hands steadied enough to hold the bowl, she whispered, "Why help me?" Rourke stared into the fire. "Because no one helped us," he said. A pause, then softer. "And because I'm tired of watching fear pretend it's holy." Mara's throat tightened. "They killed my husband." Rourke nodded once. "I know. You know." "Briar Hollow talks," he said, "even when it pretends it doesn't." Mara stared at the broth. Warmth felt suspicious after cruelty. Kindness had edges now. She was just beginning to believe she might survive the night when a sudden pounding shook the door. Mara froze. Rourke's body went still. "Cellar," he said quietly, lifting a shotgun from the corner. "Now." She barely got beneath the trapdoor before voices filled the cabin. "We know she's here." Boots scraped. Men argued. Reverend Caro's voice cut through the rest like a blade. "You've always been strange, Maddox, hiding up here like a rat. Now we hear you've taken in the witch." Mara's stomach clenched. Witch, the word again. It was never about what she'd done. It was about what they needed her to be. Rourke's voice stayed calm. "Leave." Threats followed. Names, accusations, then silence, thick as wet wool. When the cellar door opened again, Rourke offered his hand. "They'll come back," Mara whispered. "Yes," Rourke said, "but not tonight." "I can't stay," she said, voice breaking. "They'll kill you." Rourke looked at her, like she'd suggested the sun stop rising. "You won't survive out there," he said, "and I'm done letting mobs decide who gets to live." They left at first light. North, deeper into forest, untouched by roads. Rourke moved like he belonged to the land. He hunted with patience, set snares, found water under ice. He shared without keeping score. He never rushed her steps, but he never let her stop long enough to be caught. On the second day, her feet bled through her boots. Rourke wrapped them with cloth, his hands steady, expression unreadable. That night, by a small fire, Mara finally asked, Why do you live alone? Rourke's gaze stayed on the flames. Because towns are cages, he said. They call it community, but it's fear with manners. Mara swallowed. Your mother. They burned her. Rourke's jaw tightened. She knew plants. Nothing mystical. Just knowledge. The town needed it until they didn't. He spoke in fragments, like a man careful not to awaken old pain. A boy saved. A boy later dead. A sheriff needing a reason. A pyre built out of grief. Rourke leaving with his life and a permanent distrust of crowds. Mara listened, feeling the ugly symmetry of it. Fear didn't change. It just changed costumes. On the third day, they reached a ridge where the trees thinned. Below, tucked into a sheltered valley, smoke rose from several low lodges and cabins. People moved like shadows between them, careful and quiet. Mara's breath caught. Who are they? She whispered. People who don't burn what they don't understand, Rourke said. Some call them drifters. Some call them cursed. I call them family. They descended. Figures emerged. Men and women bundled in furs, eyes wary, hands near knives, not hostile, prepared. At the front stood an older woman with silver hair, braided tight and a face lined like carved wood. Her eyes were sharp, unimpressed by drama. Rourke stepped forward. Aunt Selah. Selah studied him, then looked at Mara as if reading a ledger. And who is this? She asked. Mara forced herself to speak. Mara Kellan. Briar Hollow drove me out. Selah's gaze narrowed. Why? They said I caused sickness, Mara said. They needed a reason. Selah's eyes flicked to Mara's hands, cracked, stained, the hands of someone who worked, not performed. What burden do you carry? Selah asked. Mara could have begged. She could have lied. Instead, she told the truth. I carry grief, she said, and rage, and the memory of my husband dying because people needed a villain. Selah stared a beat longer, then laughed once. Warm, not cruel. Good, she said. Truth has teeth. She turned. Bring her inside. Feed her. For the first time in weeks, Mara ate without looking over her shoulder every second. For the first time since Gideon died, she slept without dreaming of snow. Peace lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, Rourke returned from scouting with his shoulders tense. They're coming, he said. Mara felt it before she understood it. Briar Hollow. Rourke nodded. 10, maybe more. Fear rose in Mara like bile. Selah's expression didn't change. Then we decide what we are, she said. Mara looked at the valley, at the people who had fed her, without asking for a confession first. They'll burn this place, Mara whispered. Selah's eyes sharpened. Will they? Mara's throat worked. If they think they can. Rourke touched Mara's shoulder. We can move you farther north. Deeper. Mara stared past him toward the tree line. Running had kept her alive. Running had also kept them hunting. No, Mara said. Rourke blinked. Mara, no, she repeated. If I keep running, they'll keep needing a witch, and the next woman won't have someone to find her in a barn. Sela studied her. Then what? Mara took a breath and said the thought she'd carried like a splinter. The water, she said. Their creek is poisoned. Rourke's eyes narrowed. What? Mara spoke faster now, urgency giving shape to memory. It tasted wrong, metallic. The sickness didn't act like a curse. It acted like something in the body, slow, creeping, making children weak and minds unstable. Sela's gaze stayed on Mara. You're sure? I'm sure enough, Mara said quietly. To bet my life. Sela nodded once. Then we meet them. When the mob arrived, it came like a bad memory with boots. 11 men this time, faces hard with cold and conviction. At their center walked Reverend Caro, eyes bright with certainty. Beside him, the sheriff, jaw tight, gaze restless. They stopped at the valley's edge, as if the land itself repulsed them. "We know she's here!" Caro shouted. Sela stepped forward. "You've come far to trespass," Caro sneered. "We've come to cleanse evil." Mara felt her heartbeat pound, but she stepped forward anyway. Cloak wrapped tight, chin lifted. Caro's gaze locked on her. "Mara Kellan, you bring death with you." Mara's voice came out steadier than she expected. "Your creek is sick." A ripple of confusion passed through the men. Caro scoffed. "Lies." "There's poison upstream," Mara said. "Mining runoff, metal. You can burn me, and it won't change what's in your wells." The sheriff hesitated. "Upstream?" Caro snapped. "We don't mine." "Not in town," Mara said. "But someone does. You've seen wagons, heard talk. You chose to blame a woman instead of asking why your water tastes like pennies." Caro's face darkened. "You dare?" Rourke stepped forward, shotgun lowered, but present. A quiet warning. Caro turned his anger toward him. "You'd protect her?" Rourke's voice was calm. "I'd protect a human being from animals pretending they're righteous." The sheriff's gaze flicked between Mara, Sela, and the armed valley behind them. He saw what Caro refused to see. This wouldn't be a simple burning. This would be blood and snow. The sheriff lifted a hand. "We go back. We test the water properly." Caro whirled. "Weakness!" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Sense." Caro's eyes flashed, but he saw the crack spreading through his men. "This isn't over," he called at Mara as they turned away. Mara's voice followed him, quiet and sharp. "It will be when you stop needing witches." They retreated into the trees. The valley held its breath until the last bootstep faded. Sela looked at Mara. "Now we find proof." The waiting days were worse than the fight, because hope is fragile, and mobs do not like being embarrassed. Scouts collected water from different points along the creek line, clean springs, tainted bends, places where sediment clung like gray bruises. Rourke found signs of a hidden dig site upriver. Hacked earth, stained stones, the smell of disturbed metal. Sela sent a runner to a trading post for a traveling surveyor, someone whose word Briar Hollow couldn't dismiss as witch talk. 2 mornings later, the men returned. 17 this time. A wagon. Rope coiled like a promise. Caro at the front, eyes fever bright. the sheriff beside him, face strained. Carol called out, "We tested the wells. Nothing but water." Mara's stomach clenched. Sela didn't flinch. "Did you test upstream?" The sheriff hesitated. Carol snapped, "We don't chase shadows. We take what's ours." Two men started forward with rope. Rourke lifted his shotgun, and then a voice called from behind the valley, "Hold!" A man approached, older, coat battered, spectacles fogged. He carried a small case and the patient posture of someone who knew facts could be more dangerous than guns. Sela nodded. "Mr. Halver," Caro sneered. "And who is he?" Halver opened his case like he'd done it 100 times. He tested the water with simple tools, sniffed, watched a strip change color, then looked up. "You've got heavy contamination," Halver said. "Metal runoff, poison, enough to sicken children and livestock. Long exposure can cause tremors, confusion, mood changes." A murmur spread through Briar Hollow's men, confusion colliding with shame. The sheriff's voice cracked. "So it's true." Caro barked, too quickly. "Lies!" Halver looked unimpressed. "I'm paid to measure land, not flatter towns." Rourke spoke. "There's a dig site upstream." Caro's eyes darted, searching for unity. But unity dies when the truth becomes measurable. The butcher muttered, "We beat her husband." Another voice, quieter, "We left them to die." Caro snapped, "Enough!" But it was too late. The sheriff stared at the snow like it might swallow him. "Mara, we didn't know." Mara's voice was steady, but it hurt to speak. "You didn't want to know." Caro stepped forward, trying to reclaim the crowd with certainty. "Even if the water is tainted, she's still—" Mara cut him off, quiet and lethal. "What I am is the woman you punished because you were afraid." Silence. Wind moved through the trees, listening. The sheriff backed away from Caro, then turned to his men. "We go home." Caro hissed, "Cowards!" The sheriff's voice rose, anger finally finding the right target. "We poisoned our own children and blamed a woman. If you want fire, Caro, burn the men digging upriver." Caro's face went rigid. He wanted blood. He wanted certainty. He wanted the easy world where a villain fixes everything. But the mob was dissolving. Rope hung useless. The wagon creaked as it turned. Caro stayed a moment longer, eyes locked on Mara with hatred that felt personal. "This isn't finished," he said softly. Mara met his gaze. "It is for me." Caro turned and followed the collapsing line into the trees. The valley exhaled. Mara's knees finally gave, and Rourke caught her, quietly, without ceremony. Spring arrived like a cautious apology. Snow softened. Creeks swelled. Trees bled green again. In Briar Hollow, the dig site was exposed. The miners were found, men who'd cut into the earth and let it bleed into the water because it was easier than doing it right. Cleaning began. Mourning continued. Some things couldn't be repaired by effort. Men started coming to the valley alone. No preacher, no rope, just hats in their hands and eyes lowered. Mara did not greet them with vengeance. She greeted them with work. "I'll help anyone who comes honestly," she said. "Bring your sick. Leave your pride at the trees." Some left, offended by conditions. Others stayed, and slowly, the world changed. Not because it became kinder, but because it became less simple. A healing house rose beside Sela's lodge. Not grand, just sturdy. A place with clean water, herbs hung to dry, and a fire always ready. Mara worked until her hands ached. She delivered babies, treated fevers, sat with dying men, and didn't pretend death was punishment. She did not call herself a saint. She did not demand apology performances. She did what she'd always done. Because healing wasn't about being loved. It was about refusing to let cruelty have the last word. Rourke built shelves, repaired walls, carried water. He hunted, split wood, stood quietly nearby when Briar Hollow men came too close. His presence, a reminder that mobs were not welcome here. One evening, late spring, Mara sat outside with bitter tea. The air smelled of thawed earth. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, high and bright, alive. Rourke sat beside her without speaking. For a long time they listened to the valley breathe. Then he said, "You were dying in that barn." Mara nodded. "I know." Rourke's voice stayed even. "You didn't just survive. You faced them." Mara stared into the distance. "I got tired of running." Rourke nodded once. "So did I." Mara swallowed. "Gideon died thinking the world had decided what I was." Rourke looked at her. "The world doesn't decide. It only tries." Weeks later, the sheriff came alone. No preacher, no mob. He carried supplies and a face that looked older. He stopped at the valley's edge and waited like a man who knew he didn't deserve a welcome. Mara approached. The sheriff's voice cracked. "Mara." She didn't answer. He swallowed. "We moved the wells. We cleaned what we could. We buried more children." His eyes dropped. "I can't undo what we did. I can't bring Gideon back." His voice shook. "But I came to say, you were right, and we were—" He couldn't finish. Mara watched him a long time. Then she said quietly, "You were afraid." The sheriff flinched. Mara continued, calm as stone. "Fear makes people hungry for someone to punish." Tears slid down the sheriff's face. "Can you ever—" Mara interrupted gently. "I'm not your church. I'm not your forgiveness." The sheriff nodded, broken. "Then what do I do?" Mara's gaze went past him to the trees where winter had once waited like an executioner. "Live with it," she said. "And when the next woman is different, don't light a fire." The sheriff set the supplies down. "These are for the healing house." Mara nodded once. "Leave them." He hesitated. "Caro, he's still saying it was you, that you bewitched the water." Mara's mouth hardened. Rourke stepped beside her, quiet as a shadow. Mara's voice stayed calm. "If Caro comes here again, he won't find a dying woman in a barn." The sheriff swallowed. "I know." He turned to go. Halfway back to the trees, he stopped and called, without looking back. "I'm sorry." Mara didn't answer. Not because she wanted him to suffer, but because some apologies aren't bridges, they're stones placed on graves. That night, Mara sat by the fire inside the healing house. Sela joined her, lowering herself slowly. Sela watched Mara and said, "You've become trouble." Mara's mouth twitched. That's supposed to be an insult? Sela's eyes glinted. It's praise. Only fools live a life that doesn't bother anyone. Mara stared into the flames. Winter had tried to erase her. It had stripped her home, stolen her name, buried her husband, hollowed her body. But it had failed. Because some people, when pushed into the cold, do not disappear. They endure. And when they return to warmth, they do not come back as the person the world tried to destroy. They come back as proof. Proof that fear is not fate. Proof that a mob is not God. Proof that even in the cruelest season, a human being can choose what kind of human being they will be. Later, when the valley slept and the fire burned low, Rourke stood at the doorway and looked out at the trees. Mara approached quietly and stood beside him. He didn't turn. He just asked, "You okay?" Mara answered honestly, "No." A pause. Then she added, "Softer, but I'm here." Rourke nodded once, like that was the only prayer he trusted. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the wind moved across the plains again, still sharp, still restless, but it sounded different now, not like a verdict, like a warning. Try to erase her if you want. Winter will help you, but she has already learned how to live inside it, and that makes her dangerous.